Well, hello, folks, and welcome to the Resilient Leadership Podcast, where everything we talk about is aimed at helping you to lead with a greater sense of calm, clarity, and conviction, even in anxious times. My name is Bridget Tyler, and today, as always, I am joined by my wonderful collaborator and co-host, Irvine Nugent. And Irvine, so good to be with you today. And as we are recording, you have just flown back from London. Say hello to listeners and tell us how your trip went.
Well, hello, everyone. My trip was amazing. I was there very quick for a few days, and I had an amazing opportunity to work with a program over there with female leaders in procurement. And we had a full day workshop around executive presence, and they were a delight to work with. And my good friend, Laura Scarf, she runs the program. And if you're a procurement officer and you're in England, look that up because it's do yourself a favor. But I'm doing well. And I am really, really excited about today's topic, appreciative inquiry, and how that's such an important leadership skill. So I suppose, Bridget, we should start with the basics, the ABCs, and tell our listeners, and kind of some may have heard the term, others may not. So when we say appreciative inquiry, what's that all about?
It is exactly the right question to start with because, as you said, if you are maybe an HR professional or an organizational development specialist, you've heard of this term before. It's been around a while. But I think most of our listeners are leaders and managers, and they may not be familiar with this term, right?
Yeah.
So, what does it really mean? And as the name suggests, it's about inquiring into what is right, what is good, what is effective, what is already working well in an individual, a team, or an organization. And it's really based on this basic assumption that no matter how difficult a situation might be, how problematic it is, or how much it might need to change, if you're curious enough to ask the right questions, there is always something that's working well that you can unearth and that you can build upon, right? And I love that basic challenge that no matter how much we're struggling, whether that be us as individuals or our teams, if we can be open to this idea of appreciating what is, we make some pretty cool discoveries. And what that makes possible are really new outcomes for change.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know about you, Irvine, but I remember years and years ago when I was first introduced to this, I was really drawn to it. And I wonder, when did you first hear about this and were you drawn to it?
I actually can pinpoint where I first, because I'd never heard of it and I was curious. And actually it was in a symposium for my Ph.D. program. We had a symposium. We were just about to begin the work of identifying our area of inquiry for the doctorate thesis. We had this session and they said, today's going to be about appreciative inquiry. And we're like, oh, what's that about? And I can remember a video that they produced, and it was from a National Geographic photographer called DeWitt Jones. And the title of the video was What's Right with the World. And I remember being so drawn by that video. It was beautiful. And it was all about the lens you look through, and appreciative inquiry is a different lens of things that are working. And they use that, before we, solve a problem, it's important to look through a lens as well of what's working right. And I remember that, like, being struck by that and being struck by, in a way, the bias that I had to, like, always feel I was fixing a problem. And here was a different way of approaching it. So it struck me, and always has struck me, actually. It really has changed the way that I look at a problem now, or at least that I try and come with a more complete, that I'm always looking at both sides rather than just what's not working.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Bridget, I'm curious, we've defined kind of appreciative inquiry, but maybe let's focus a little bit on how a leader could practice this. What examples do you think that would bring this to a very concrete understanding?
Yeah. First of all, I just have to say, what a great title for the video.
Oh,
what is right with the world?
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's on YouTube or not, but he is, and he's a very inspiring person. I would encourage you to look at it, to look for it maybe in YouTube.
I'm going to. That is just, it just touched me when you said that, So yeah, building on what you said there, Irvine, it's really the lens that we're choosing to look at a situation, a person, a team, or whatever. So one place that I have found that I think it can be really helpful to leaders is at the sort of organizational level when you are initiating or leading change. So, let's say you've been tasked with rolling out a change program or a change effort. And I'm going to give the example of a client that I worked with who was given that task. And he was actually brought into the organization with the mandate to change a lot of broken systems and to bring more a spirit of innovation into this dodgy place. And in our first few coaching sessions, boy, he really showed up discouraged and frustrated at the lack of receptivity to change that he found amongst his peers, the directors and VPs. And the more he expressed this frustration, the more curious I got and kind of found out that, to your point about focusing on problems and being a problem solver, that was the lens that he had brought. And he talked a lot about what was broken and what needed to get fixed. And it needed to get fixed quickly. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that because those are truthful statements. But it didn't help him to enroll people in this. So I mentioned appreciative inquiry to him, talked about what it was, and asked him if he thought there might be a way to use this lens as a way to talk differently about it. And so we came up with a few questions for him to ask these recalcitrant directors and VPs, right, that might open their minds to him and to the winds of change. And this is kind of what we came up with, as I recall. So the first question we came up with together is, what do you think are the greatest strengths of this organization? What does it do? What do we do really, really well? And how do you think we can build on these strengths? How can I build on these strengths, in my role? It was a question he never asked. He wasn't looking for that. The second question was, tell me about a success that your team or division has had that you're really proud of. And he said, boy, I heard some really wonderful stories. And then the last one was like, okay, like in the last year or two, have you seen examples of innovation, however small? And he found out that there were pockets of innovation in that organization. And one of them ended up being this mid-level manager who he then developed a relationship with and piloted a sort of beta test of this change initiative with her. So bottom line is this approach changed. I think it was a turning point because it helped him to build some trust and connection with these folks. And helped him to learn about the organization in a different way. I always remember that. And I'm curious, Irvine, like when you hear me tell this story, what strikes you most about it?
It is that it runs counter to so often the perceived way that we logically go around solving problems. And I think it nuances how we approach things. I think we normally get very logical. What's the problem? How may this organization change? How may it go about the change, etc. And it's like, well, actually, what is working and what's the insight? Why are they like? Why is things working? What is it that makes it work? And can we draw of that strength and bring that to the problem that we're approaching? And I think it's so novel and creative and positive. And that's what I love about it. I love the energy. I think that's what it is. I think we can get bogged down in kind of, this seems heavy. And there's something lighter about that as well, which I think enhances creativity.
Yeah, the energy. I think that's a really good term for it because I feel like he was stuck.
Yes.
And then when he put this lens on, it created different energy in his interactions with people. Yeah, that's great. I'm thinking of another place where I think leaders can use the appreciative inquiry lens, and that's with their teams. And in particular, when they are wanting their teams to change or perform at a different level. Let's say the team's not very good at managing conflict or they don't collaborate, but whatever the case may be, right? You and I work with clients all the time that have complaints about their teams. So as an example, I was working with a law firm and the managing partner was saying to me that his fellow partners would meet regularly and the meetings were stale and unproductive. And what he said to me is, they don't engage with one another. They don't collaborate. They don't think together. These meetings are boring. And I don't know how to change this. And they don't seem to trust and respect each other. And they don't utilize, blah, 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 blah. Right. And I don't know why I thought to bring a appreciative inquiry into it, but I did. And I said, tell me if there is a time when this group of partners actually did work together in the way that you're saying. I mean, they've been together for a while. So over the last couple of years, has there ever been a meeting or a conversation that was engaging and collaborative and challenging and robust? Ever? And you know what? He goes, actually, there was this meeting that we had. And it's always stood out to me that it was so different from the rest. Okay, so bottom line here is we talked a little bit about what did he think was different about it, but then he took it back to his partners and he said, there was a meeting we had a few months ago, and it was one of the best meetings I think we've ever had, and this is what I noticed about it. And I'd like us to have more of those kind of meetings. What do you think contributed to that meeting going so well, and how can we have more of those? And they came up with their own solutions based on what worked right and what worked well. So I always remember that example as well.
I love that. Yeah.
So how about you? So those are two examples that come to my mind with clients, but in your own experience.
Yeah, I think we've kind of we've gone organizationally teams. I think the other logical place we can go is with individuals. So so often, part of the management leadership experience is checking in with your employees. Let's be very honest here. I mean, I know that from working with clients and myself being a manager supervisor, when we talk about check-in, really what we're looking for is what problems are you, how can I help you with any problems? So it's like, what's not working and how can I help you? And really, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's, and it's a great question to ask. And it's a question, where you think I'm being useful, I'm helping to solve some logjams. But what would it look like to approach it from an appreciative inquiry point of view? And some questions, and just some interesting questions you could have would be like, hey, what's a win you had recently that you feel really good about? And then how can I help you have more wins like that? Which is interesting because it's getting at maybe the same question, but from a totally different energy level. And then, what's a strength of yours that you enjoy using? Something you do well, something you get energy. How might you use that gift more often? Where are places in the work that you do, the teams you're on, the organization that you could use that a little more? What's something you've learned about that you feel excited about? And if there's anything more that you'd like to learn, what other areas would you like to learn about? Or if they're working on a particular project and maybe the project's coming to conclusion would be, what did you enjoy most about this new project? What insights did it give you? How might you use those insights? So, I think those questions are creative and they're reflective. And I think they bring an energy to the table that I think that the employees would love to be involved with and see them kind of challenging themselves and bringing it to other parts of the organization. So, Bridget, what do you think of these questions?
Well, I was listening to them really carefully and noticing, again, to use your word, the energy around them and imagining if I was asked those questions as an employee, how would I feel about it?
Yeah.
And it's not like you have to, have all of those necessarily in one conversation, but you could take any one of those and build a great one-on-one conversation around that and take the update conversation a different direction other than tell me what you're working on and how's it going.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now, I know you do a fair amount of work with teams. And so I'm curious to hear if, as you work with teams, are there questions that maybe, again, using the appreciative inquiry lens, can help a team to think about where are they now and what future do they want to create that again is not problem centric, but more appreciative centric?
I think part of that is this teams. I notice we're too busy getting on to the next task that we don't take time to celebrate. So part of that, appreciative inquiry is celebrating the wins. So how do you want to celebrate our successes? And especially if it's a long-term project over, say, a couple of years, don't wait for the 2 years to celebrate. Like, what are some intervals along the way that are important? And then kind of, you could ask the team, which of our recent wins or successes as a team would be meaningful to you and why? Why was that meaningful? And to notice the dynamics of a team and how some will celebrate in a different way, different things that are happening within the team. And then the future visioning, what would a successful future as a team look like? What would that mean to us? And what individual strengths or team strengths can we leverage for success in this moment? How might we structure the team to make that happen? A thing that I do in coaching as well, I think I mentioned this before in another episode, when it comes to public speaking, et cetera, but it applies here as well. Some things we make these plans and then we say, well, what could go wrong? And it's a very logical question. Yeah. Like what could go wrong? And then some of the things, and I always say, if you've got an anxious person, oh boy, they'll come up with 27 things that could go wrong. But like just for a moment, if you can change the lens and say, what if everything went right?
Ooh.
What would that look like? What would that feel like? And I love that question as well. Like, what if everything went right with this, And it's, again, a change of lens, which is so important.
Oh, that's a great question to ask a team as you're thinking about the future and trying to co-create it together. Yeah, sure.
Bridget, anything else we're leaving out? How might a leader apply appreciative inquiry?
Well, I think let's apply it to ourselves, right? You and I both work with a lot of high achievers, driven people who have very high standards. That's part of how they've gotten where they are. And they're pretty hard on themselves, push themselves, right? And I think many times they feel like they themselves aren't measuring up to their own high standards. And so what if, to balance that, we took some time periodically to use some of those same questions, but for ourselves? Like, when was the last time at work I felt really meaningfully engaged and fulfilled? And what was present? Or, hey, that simple question about what's a win that I've had recently that I feel really good about? Because let me tell you, a lot of times leaders, they have wins, but they are in the rear view mirror. They are not remembering them, right?
Yeah.
And how about just reflecting from time to time on what is it that you really do best and care about most, in your heart of hearts? And are you doing enough of that? And how could you do more of that?
Yeah.
So I think, again, many of the people that are listening right now and who work with us are great problem solvers. And that's a wonderful thing. Appreciative inquiry is not so much about solving a problem as it is about creating new possibilities for change based on that basic assumption that let's find out what's working really well and let's figure out how to do more of it. Yeah.
Not bad.
Okay, so that's all I got on that. But now I'm curious, Irvine, because we try to include some neuroscience findings in our episodes, or many of them. I want to know, what do you think might be relevant to this topic when it comes to how the brain works?
Well, it's interesting. Up to this, we have mentioned just a few times that the normal way we go about solving problems, etc., is what's wrong. And really, there's nothing surprising in that, because as human beings, we have what is called a negativity bias. And that comes from evolution. And it is, again, it's something negative, even though we call it negative bias. It is actually something that has helped us survive a potential threat in an uncertain world. The brain is a very conservative organ. It says, let's be safe. Let's protect ourselves. And so the brain will make decisions on being safe. And yet, as human beings, we do look for the negative. I know many leaders have gone through a process which is called the 360 feedback. And what that means is basically not only are you assessing yourself, you're also inviting others to assess you. So you get this 360 view. And I've done countless themselves and also countless debriefs with others. And yet it never fails to come up that in that feedback, there'll be one data point or there'll be a comment, and the comment is kind of either what we might be a negative comment or a comment about something that they're pointing out. And it's so funny. You can have a page of 20 comments that the person is doing right. And then in another page, there's this one comment. And where do they go to? Because I always say this question, where would you like to start? Well, let's start with page number 7 because this person said this about me. And it's like, oh, that's so interesting. We can't help ourselves but go to the one piece of something that may be a little bit of criticism or something about us. I'm not saying that's wrong. That's just something to observe.
Yes.
It is a habit which is deeply ingrained and it's part of our evolutionary process. And it has helped us survive and to be aware of that. And so therefore, we have to be aware that as we approach problems in life, as we approach problems at work, that we have a predisposition to look at what's not working, what is wrong. And we are prone to this. And so therefore, appreciative inquiry is a challenge. First of all, it's a challenge. And also it is an invitation that unlike our caveman and cavewoman days, when literally there were threats all around us, thankfully the world is, though we may not think this, but the world is a safer place. And therefore, we also have to look for the positives and what might be working and really capitalize on them. Does that resonate with you, Bridget?
Oh, totally. I mean, what we're saying is that the brain is wired to see the negative, right? And there's that phrase of the negativity bias says that the brain is, it's like Teflon on positive things and Velcro on negative things.
So true.
So if that's how our brain is wired or predisposed because of the survival needs, we have to be really intentional about balancing that.
Yeah.
Right. That's very, very interesting. And I sure do relate to the negativity bias. I notice it myself. And you know what I notice is when I'm tired, I haven't slept well, or I've been very stretched thin, that negativity bias is a lot stronger.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right?
It is amazing the impact of a lack of sleep and food on humans' behavior. It just reinforces some of the more primitive feelings and primitive actions that we have.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've said on this podcast before, but your amygdala is much more prone to reacting to threats if you haven't slept well. So at any rate, that's a great piece of neuroscience. It just tells us that we need to bring a balanced perspective, and that's what appreciative inquiry does. So that's one of the great benefits, right? Is it helps us to balance the way our brain tends to see and see the negative.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of some other benefits too, though, as we've been sharing examples and talking about this, optimism and hope are so essential to leadership.
Yeah.
We don't follow leaders who don't give us some hope and optimism for the future. And I think if leaders can figure out ways to introduce an appreciative inquiry lens on things, it instills that hope.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's connected to resilience. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, Irvine. But if you think about resilience in terms of facing into adversity and knowing you have resources both inside you and around you, then I think appreciative inquiry helps with that too. But let's connect it, if we can, to our definition of what resilient leadership is, right? Do you see some connections between this?
I really do. If we kind of break it down, we've said in other episodes, there are 3 stays to resilience, stay calm, stay connected, and stay the course, and we've talked a lot about anxiety and organizational anxiety. You think, oh my God, it's all negative. This resilience stuff is all about anxiety. And it is. And yet this lens really helps, because this lens actually has the potential of calming down some of that anxiety around us. So first of all, the remaining calm, part of calmness is in the midst of what people are focused on around, and so often people are focused on what's wrong, what's going wrong. And then if a leader comes in and is able to change that lens in a very calm way, you know what? I understand that this is happening, but there's also lots of things that are going right. We've talked about changing the energy. That energy can really help, people stay calm in the midst of that. Okay, yeah. So yeah, there may be problems, but there's also a lot that's going right.
Yes.
And then that's staying connected. Part of that is in the midst of leadership anxiety, we can distance ourselves, or we can, be confused. And we just talked about these one-on-one questions, how creative some of these questions are. And just think of that energy of that energy of connection with a person of, what's going right here? How might you use your strengths? And that ability then to really use that as a power of staying connected with others. Mm-hmm. And then the last thing is staying the course, that in resistance, sometimes we give up. And I think the appreciative inquiry can help us as well to stay the course, that there is more to what we are seeing than just everything that is going wrong. Actually, what we're seeing is some resistance here. And maybe we can see that resistance through a different lens. And part of that is actually, we've said this before, things are actually going right. Mm-hmm. Because we're actually meeting this resistance, it means that we're having an impact and that we're going to overall make a change in the future. So I think there is I think this is a lens that can be very useful for leaders in actually being resilient in the environment that we find ourselves today.
Oh, man, those are some great connections. I love it. And when you were talking about staying calm, you're so right that in anxious times, there's a threat that we are perceiving and detecting. And then the brain, because of that negativity bias, can exaggerate the threat, right? Yeah. And then everything is bad and everything is going wrong. And then that makes us more anxious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. What comes to mind with the practice for this week?
All right. So we have a very simple practice, and it's called fill in the blank. Now, it's simple, but I'm going to say it's also not easy. Simple and easy are not the same things. It has 2 steps, but it does require reflective space, and it's a bit counterintuitive. That's why it's not necessarily easy. Mm-hmm. So here's the first step. You take a minute to think about an area of your work or your life that you are not happy with. Maybe the negativity bias is casting a long shadow over this facet of your work or life. Maybe it's your relationship with your spouse or your boss or an employee or something about yourself that whenever you think about it, all you see are the negatives. That's what you do first, is find that area of dissatisfaction. Now, for example, I recently asked a client of mine the question, and I said, tell me about something that you feel really negative about right now. The very first thing she said is my body. And I remember being really taken aback. I said, well, tell me more about that. And she goes, yeah, it's been so stressful the last 6 months. And I knew this because we'd been working together for several months. And I've gained about 30 pounds. And I just can't believe I did that. And I just hate that about myself, you know? I really felt some empathy there. So the second step, though, is to then fill in the blank in this way. And here's the simple phrase: I appreciate blank about my body, or whatever the area of your life or work is, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I left her with, this homework. And I really want you to think about this. It's not going to be easy, but I appreciate what about my body. And let's chat about it next time. And what was so interesting, Irvine, is when she came back, she said, at first I hated this exercise because there was nothing coming to me. But then as I sat with it, I realized, wow, I appreciate how strong my body is. I have children and grandchildren, and I lift those grandchildren up with great ease. I have strong legs and I have strong arms. And I go through my days with a lot of energy and no pain. And I'm actually, so she said, I sort of discovered a gratitude for my body.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
I love that. It does, because so often it's not where we go naturally. And it really, in its difficulty, it absolutely creates a space where we can look through a different lens. Bridget, I have really enjoyed this. It brought back a memory of when I first encountered this term, and really to appreciate it a little more. Appreciative inquiry. So today, we've talked, and I just encourage our listeners to kind of think about that, to be aware that our default is the negative. Our default is to look for the problem. And maybe the next time you find you're in that default, to kind of put this lens on and, as I said at the beginning, what's going right? What's going right with the world? What's going right with the organization? What's going right with the team? What's going right for my employee? And maybe try and craft some questions that begin with that lens rather than the other way. And just notice the energy that comes up. And if there's a change in energy, and I challenge you, and I really think there will be. So thank you, Bridget. Yeah, I hope our listeners have enjoyed this, and we look forward to our next episode. So bye for now.
Take care, folks.